Hey, welcome to episode 154 of the Titanforge podcast. I'm Dratnos, joined as always by Tettles, and this week we have special guest, Reloe. Welcome, Reloe.
Hello. Thanks for
Hello.
having me.
Thanks for being here. Reloe is known, I think, mostly for WeakAuras work all over the place. Depending on which WeakAuras you use, you may be familiar with some of his work. Let me pull up some of it. We have the M plus timer is your all-time most viewed WeakAura, but also we've got spell CDs on nameplates, a banger, and one of the little-known favorites, the Sanctum of Domination glows WeakAura. Tettles, what's your favorite Reload WeakAura?
The rebranded I'm fired up cooldown on nameplates WeakAura. that
Why is that one called I'm fired up? Have we talked about that? Do we know who made this?
there's some lore with that, right, Relo?
I'm not exactly sure. I know a lot of people re-upload this WeakAura because they add their own data to it and then put the name on it.
Okay, yeah.
But
There's
this time
something-
I'm providing the data myself.
It was something with Growl uploaded it randomly and named it I'm fired up on it. I don't really remember how that happened.
I see. But yeah, so tremendous amount of expertise making weak auras. You're also, though, a fairly high-end raider yourself, raiding with Northern Sky, which what have you tanked and healed for them over the...
I've done everything for them.
Wow.
There was a tier where I did all 3 roles as well at some point.
What?
Yeah, in Eternal Palace. I started as a healer and then I had to do 3rd tank on Ashvane and then last boss, obviously, Resto Druid wasn't so good, so I had to DPS. But yeah, now I'm stuck tanking because you can't find tanks.
Yeah. World renowned for the Mythic Jailer guide, available on over on youtube.com. Search Reloe, or I think WoW Reloe is the URL there, but here's the Mythic Jailer guide, Brewmaster POV, a full hour long of commentary separated into chapters. A little bit less important now that it's all faded and the boss dies in 3 minutes, but was very useful for guilds progressing when this actually came out.
I watched the whole entire hour-long guide because Northern Sky killed Jailer in like 150 pulls, and my guild was not close to 150 pulls on that boss. And so I was like, well, clearly they're doing something that I'm not.
Yeah, so a tremendous amount of expertise that will be brought in as our episode today is going to be about. It's going to be about the UI. We're going to talk about weak auras as part of that, and of course, via a crime to not learn as much as we can from you on that topic. But we'll also talk about the new default UI that's coming in Dragonflight and all of the implications or ways to use that, and just kind of the theory of designing a good UI for yourself in general, pitfalls and good choices you can make there. Yeah, that'll be the main topic. Before we get there, I guess, real quick, we've talked about this, I think, last week, but Relo, as our guest this week, do you have any thoughts on the 40% character damage, or monster damage and character health change that came in, and any soapbox you want to get on about this design happening here?
Yeah, I think in general this is a good idea, because I think the idea behind this is to slow down the gameplay for the healer a little bit, that I have more time to heal people up and they don't die to one-shots. But it requires still a lot of tuning down from specific abilities, because right now in Mythic Plus there's still so much stuff that does too much damage. Multiple tanks have self-sustain issues because of this as well, because their HP got buffed, their damage taken got buffed, but their self-healing did not. So that's an issue, for example, for Brewmaster. I think DK got a little bit hit as well, Paladin, those kind of things.
Yeah, the Brewmaster, it's in an interesting place, right? Because it's a fairly high damage tank right now, but it's very susceptible to just kind of rotting out or dying to magic damage as well.
Yeah, magic damage is really bad right now.
So we had raid testing one day after this change last week happened, and we started out on Primalist Council playing with a Brewmaster monk, and he was getting owned, and he just logs onto a Prot Warrior, and then he's just like, this tank is sturdy. That other tank sucked.
Yeah.
Yep. Warrior takes no damage.
Well, if it'll help you feel better, they did nerf Warrior AoE by about 5%. So,
Yep.
Oh, they were
Great.
only They were only 5% ahead. I see.
well, and you know they nerfed their defensives by not at all. So hopefully that makes them a little bit less sturdy compared to the other tanks. We'll see if it works.
Technically, damage nerfs their survivability as well, because they rely on a lot of leech for ignore pain.
True. Yeah, actually can't argue with that. So you know, we'll
They-
have to
Not
wait
bad
and see.
at all, but it's there.
Dude, they buffed Blood Decay today. They buffed Blood Decay damage, which I mean, it needed it. It was
Yeah.
negative dam, but I mean, that tank looks a lot better now if it's doing competitive amounts of damage.
We also saw a huge suite of dungeon nerfs coming through as well. I actually think this was maybe the most promising set of changes to dungeons I've ever seen. Like this was kind of the scale of the lower Karazhan stuff that came in early in season 4, but it's like to every dungeon all at once. They hit almost all of the worst stuff. Couple of things they've still missed. There was those void elementals in Shadow and Burial Grounds. They nerfed the dot damage but buffed the initial damage that they do, which I remember when I did that dungeon last testing period, we just brought those to the graveyard and they spawn camped us for like 2 minutes until we could get them down. I'm a little bit worried that will still be the case with this, but I guess I'm not 100% sure. But other than that, it's like most dungeons they've been doing some really good stuff too on beta, so promising for me.
I mean, this kind of had to happen with looking at the amount of damage intake that was happening. Maybe Reloe knows a little bit more, but I was hearing healers were saying that like the only 2 healers that could heal high-level keys were Preservation Evoker and Resto Druid. Did you notice anything that was like that, Reloe? Where it seemed like at like 15 plus level, this shit was just like not playable if you weren't playing one of those healers.
Honestly, I haven't had a good Evoker yet, I think, because a lot of... I mean,
they're not very many.
I mean, it's just a fact. It's a new class. A lot of people try it out. They don't know exactly what they're doing yet. So the chances of getting a good one is just lower than when you invite a different class. But yeah, I think Resolute was doing really good so far. That's for sure. I don't know much about the other healers, to be honest.
It was just weird because it seemed like the healing throughput was a problem from a lot of the mechanics because they buffed their damage by a lot. And so there was a decent amount of things that you just previously kind of heal through, but now is just like almost impossible unless you had Resto Druid HPS.
Yeah, I kind of like that in principle. Like, you know, if while we're trying to figure stuff out, it's like the healing is hard. Because if the healing is like doable already, then once we're actually like good at everything, it's gonna feel really easy, right? It's just like if there's 2 classes that can do it and 5 that can't, okay, we got a problem.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
I do wonder if this is gonna make like weekly 15s a meme again, though.
Yeah, we'll see. We are going to be coming in very undergeared, very low item level compared to the content on like December 13th or whatever when M plus and everything hits. We won't have that usual like heroic week of capped at +6s kind of catch up 10 item levels.
Also consumables and stuff. Like, are you gonna have all those consumables rank 3? Can just spam them to start?
How much gold do you have?
Yeah.
That is the question. Yeah, I'm a little bit worried actually, I guess, about the gold economy of next expansion. How expensive it's gonna be to raid. I feel like though, if you're like a no life, you know, profession master, you'll be able to make quite a bit of gold, especially in those first few weeks. So might try and do that.
I'm gonna be honest. I don't know how the profession system works at all.
Yeah, I've been waiting for like
I've
been waiting for like a Wowhead deep dive post to kind of educate myself more on it. But like I've just done a little bit of the stuff on the beta, but I think there's a lot of still unknown variables about just how fast you can get the knowledge and stuff. But
yeah,
maybe you can actually test that on one of the servers, like the leveling server or something.
I think you can, yeah.
Okay.
There's just not a lot of people doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I care about it, but I don't care about it enough to level a profession guy on that server on beta. Anyways, couple of side topics there. We can move into talking about the UI though, and the default UI overhaul that's come with Dragonflight, which I've heard mixed opinions. I think the most common question that I got asked is, are you going to stop using LVUI on Twitch chat about this? Which my answer was I never used LVUI, so it doesn't really make sense as a question. But yeah, a lot of people are asking about like, turning off or replacing add-ons with default UI functionality. Reloe, do you have a how has your UI changed in the past since free patch has come out? Have you done anything with the default stuff?
Pretty much it hasn't changed at all. There are a few things I could see that you just can replace, something like a minimap add-on. Maybe you don't need that anymore, or action bars if you don't care too much about the look of them. But in general, if you were using add-ons before, you are probably not gonna replace them with the default UI.
I think that's about how I feel about it too. Like it definitely improves the quality of life for players who were previously using default UI, but I think that there is still some like critical information, at least for me, that is still lacking from the default UI that I need to replace it with add-ons to be able to track effectively.
I think a big part as well for people who really like to tinker with their UIs, there's not an easy way to position stuff perfectly. You can't change. You can scale stuff, make it bigger and smaller, but you can't only change the height, only change the width. You're just locked into certain settings.
Yeah, it's nowhere near as good as the WeakAuras display tab, right? Yeah, which we're all pretty used to for tweaking our UI.
I don't know why they didn't either just like almost completely copy LVUI or like completely bake WeakAuras or something like that into the default game. That feels like that should have been a step that they should have maybe have made.
I don't even know if that's like a goal. Yeah, good.
Yeah, I think they might be afraid of making it too complicated for new players.
Okay, that's a good point.
Yeah, like I think that so like a lot of people are asking like, are you going to replace all your add-ons? And it seems like kind of a goal or an ideal for a lot of people is they want the base UI to be everything that they need so that they don't have to use any add-ons. But I don't actually think that's that realistic of a goal. I think that like making the UI look more modern, making it better to use relative to before were good goals, but I don't know. I think that keeping add-ons being like, and like there are some functionalities where it's like, okay, I shouldn't need an add-on to do this, right? Like the edit mode stuff in general, like there's a lot of nice stuff in there. But I don't know. I think that for people that are comfortable with their old UIs and that have things looking the way they want to, I don't think that Blizzard should have been coming in and trying to be like, okay, we want to be able to make sure that our default UI can do everything that every player is currently doing with add-ons.
I do think it's nice though that they have like accessibility, like that the default like World of Warcraft game does have so many accessibility options that you're able to like kind of create whatever WeakAuras or UI profile that you want within some reason. Like they do limit some API calls that interact with some weird stuff occasionally, but I mean in general it's kind of open season for what you're like anchoring whatever to.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think it's, especially if you're somebody that wants to have like a pretty close to default UI experience, I think you can do a lot of good stuff with the new default. I would still say like WeakAuras that anchor stuff to your raid frames and a nameplate mod. I feel like those two are still pretty non-negotiable for high end stuff, but most of the other stuff, I don't know. It's like it looks less bad and it's more customizable to do everything else.
Didn't change anything about the nameplates, right? They're just still the old ones.
Yeah, they like look slightly different, but they don't have. It's not like they have a bunch of the plater functionality or anything that is really valuable.
Even if they just gave you the option to change something like textures or fonts, that would already go a long way.
Yeah, like the new cast bar texture as well is I don't know, that kind of annoys me. It's like, okay, I want to change this, but I would like to change it if there was an option to do it through the default UI to just like a flat color, but I don't think there is, at least. I think you have to use an add-on for that. So yeah, we got this question on Twitter that was basically, if you're not going to use the new default UI, what features would need to be added for me to use it, and would the devs actually want to implement those additions? And my answer for this is basically, I think the new default UI is great, but I don't think it's at all reasonable for them to try and accomplish that as a goal, and because they would have to just get all the functionality of plater and WeakAuras or whatever, and unit frames, and I don't know. I think that's just not happening, and nor should it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it would be like there'd have to be like a significant nameplate overhaul. I think the nameplates from the default UI are still by far the weakest point. Um, like whitelist, blacklisting buffs, stuff like that. Like I need to be able to track like specific stuff in certain situations depending on what I'm looking for.
You can't even see on nameplates if you lose thread, right? That's just the default UI doesn't have that.
Is that not part of default UI?
I don't think it is. I think you get like a text pop up losing thread or whatever, but you don't know which nameplate or whatever. It's really bad.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I do think that the nameplates are by far the weakest part of the default UI.
Yeah, so when we're talking about, I think nameplates, I would agree, is the first thing that I would change. I would switch to Plater, and you want to make sure that like you're tracking you're tracking your important debuffs and not your unimportant debuffs on the targets. You don't want to clutter your screen with just a bunch of stuff that's like Chaos Brand necessarily. Although maybe you want Chaos Brand if you need to like apply it to a certain mob on a certain fight. Maybe you want that on nameplates, but otherwise. That kind of stuff you can sort of take off and free some space, and any debuff that just kind of auto applies and you don't need to worry about, and then track the important ones on the nameplates only. Purgeable buffs, those kinds of things, whitelist specific important abilities. You could consider, I use a Plater mod that only shows the last name of the mob, like the last word, so I don't see, because a lot of mobs will have like Cultirus Marine, Cultirus Soldier, or whatever, and you just want Soldier and Marine.
Well, I mean, I can't. Can you even track friendly CC on the nameplates? Can't you only track your own CC on the target?
With default,
yeah.
Default these are all things that I think you need Plater or a nameplate mod to do this with. I recommend Plater, but there's a couple other good options as well. So. Yeah, I think that's one big thing to do. Another thing that we've discussed is the action bars as well. The default action bars have definitely gotten a huge buff compared to the old version. You can move them around and stuff. They're pretty customizable. So if you wanted to, you could use those. Bartender still has a couple extra pieces of functionality that I'm still going to use it for those, but you could use them. And then there's actually an interesting debate between different players about, is it good to just have your action bars and have your spells on those and maybe move the action bars towards the middle of your screen? Or do you want like a WeakAura pack that like Luxthoses or Athanars near the middle of your screen that kind of show you all of your class abilities, and then you either hide or put to the side and don't look at your action bars? I'm personally on, like, I do the WeakAuras side of this, but I don't think the action bars solution is a bad one either. Reloe, how do you handle like your kind of core rotational ability display?
I do the action bars strat, which is weird probably if you think that I'm someone who does a lot of WeakAuras. I think one reason for me is if I go to a different spec or whatever, I need WeakAuras for that spec then. And like I can't just easily play an alt and just drag all my stuff into the bars and go.
Mm-hmm.
And I will never take a WeakAura class pack from someone else. It's not because they're doing something wrong or whatever, but I don't learn the class that way. I don't learn where the buttons are and everything. I need to do that myself. So if I do a WeakAura pack for myself, I could play with that, but that's a big reason why I choose action bars, because it's easier to swap between specs and classes.
I actually, funnily enough, use both. Like on my Hunter, I end up using bars. But like on my Druid, I end up using WeakAuras almost exclusively because I find that tracking dots is like really fucking hard unless I have like a large pack, and in addition to that, I need to have like a pretty intricate like resource bar and stuff like that. So I just end up using WeakAuras more often than not. But similar to Reloe, I will take a pack, I will cut out like half the shit out of it that I don't like, and then remake a bunch of it because I don't want it to just be some default pack. I want it to be more customized for what I'm looking for.
Oh yeah, I basically just yoink. I use the Athanar ones. I think I think they're nifty, and then I just basically use them out of the tin. And then like if I identify that there's a problem, like that there's information that it's obscuring that I need, then I'll go in and tweak it. Like for instance, meta when you on Demon Hunter with that pack, when you I-beam and you enter a demonic meta, it puts that over your meta button, so you don't then know what your meta cooldown is. So I needed to like shift that out and show another, like screw with the weak aura a little bit so that I could get the info I needed there. But beyond that, I feel like it works pretty well out of the tin. And then when I do roll a new alt, it's just go to Wago, search Aphanar, and then the class name, copy weak aura string, bang.
I don't think there's a wrong answer though, at least
Yeah.
with regards to bars versus weak auras. You're going to need some weak auras for that class more often than not, at least in some variable capacity, depending on like what the role is, depending on what you're doing, just to make sure that you're tracking your buffs in a more centralized location. Because let me tell you, if you're looking at the top right hand corner of your screen trying to track your buffs down, you're probably going to be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, so Reloe, how did you get started in making weak auras? Was it for like was it you doing something for yourself, like for your own character that you wanted and couldn't find, or how long have you been doing it for?
Well, the first time I installed the add-on was, I think, before Siege of Orgrimmar, but then it was just simple buff trackers, like using the default triggers. And then the first time I did anything with custom code was after Highmaul. We had a Feral in our raid who did some custom weak auras for us, like checking if someone is in range to the brand on Imperator or whatever, right? Which had like
Holy
varying
shit.
range. Yeah, and he had an arrow and stuff, like in which way the person is. And, yeah, and
Okay.
that person quit the game, and then we just didn't have anyone doing that kind of stuff anymore. And I just decided to look at the code, learn it, and over time do this myself.
So how are you like a programmer by trade?
No.
Oh, okay.
I had a computer science class in school, but it's over 10 years ago almost now. And at the time, like the teachers we had, they didn't even go. They didn't even study this. Yeah, they were just math teachers that did this, and yeah, so this was kind of useless. So
I mean, Lua is fucking jank, and that's the best way of describing it, I think, too.
I mean, it seems all logical if you look at it. For me, at least, it's I can usually understand what someone is doing without having looked at it before.
Yeah, so how did you go from like, making those sorts of like, I guess not default, but sort of the most common use cases of weak auras, right? Into the more elaborate like custom ones, the M plus timer, the CDs on nameplates kind of stuff. How do you like how much more work goes into those, and how much like of your many years of experience are required for being able to make those like you do?
I mean, the M plus timer one, for example, that's like there were like multiple weeks of nights of coding and testing, and I at some point I was just I think it was during. When did I make this weak aura even? I think it was at the end of an expansion because I was didn't have much to do and was like, hey, I need a new project. I just want to do something bigger, learn some new stuff. And I'd never really liked the look of Gotta Go Fast, and I wanted to have something more modern looking. So I started working on this. And just over time, you look at other add-ons. What features do they have? How can I add this? And you learn. You have to learn so much on the way. And I had a lot of help from people in the WeakAuras Discord that I could just always ask, hey, how does this work? And then just looking it up on some Wikipedia, what's the event for this? But yeah, this like, I don't know how many hours went into this. It's crazy.
It was like into BFA, wasn't it? It was like right before. I think it was before. It was before Shadowlands by a little bit.
Yeah, I think it was end of expansion BFA.
Yeah, that sounds right. Have you ever like made a weak aura and then realized that it's like eating half of your RAM or something like that? Or like downloaded somebody else's weak aura and found that to be happening with them?
Not RAM, but also RAM isn't that bad if it uses a lot, because that's not the limiting factor of your performance. It's the CPU.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was one that I had that was really bad at some point. But it only got bad because of an add-on update of WeakAuras. It's the one that puts the number of how many health zones and health potions you have available on the raid.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. Maybe someone remembers. Scribe was using this, and they did a Ny'alotha run with like 29 mages and a tank, and his game completely just lagged like 1 FPS or something. because of a weak aura update breaking my thing here. And it was an easy fix. I just needed to know that this change happened, basically. And
On a Fallen Avatar, I don't know if people remember this, but you had to like juggle the stacks of the beam to make sure that you didn't refresh it. And so I ended up making one for my guild, and I don't even remember what I fucked up, but I fucked part of it up and had it load like every frame, and it was doing some garbage, and it locked up my fucking game. And I was like, oh no. I have definitely fucked up that. I fucked up that week pretty bad. And so then I was like, all right, I will wait for other people to make stuff like this.
Yeah, I remember there was a stun DR on nameplates tracker that bricked near the start of Niloth. Probably on the same WeakAuras update as the one that got yours, Reloe. Well, maybe, but it was like it would put like a green circle when they were on one DR, and then a yellow, and then a red. And then I remember pulling like Hive Mind, which had like 40 ads on one bit, and bam, 2 FPS. That was
yeah, I think the change was because back then people always like for WeakAuras to make an update, you have to return true, yeah, and people just put it at the bottom of their code. So whatever happens, it always updates. And before this was fine. I don't know exactly what they changed internally, but after this update, every time like just any random event happens that you're tracking, like a spell aura is applied, even if it doesn't change anything in your aura, WeakAuras would see this and just completely update the aura. And then if you had something that's like on multiple unit frames or multiple nameplates, that would be really bad for performance.
Yeah, so how would you go about like if a new tier rolls around and you start realizing that you're kind of lagging, like what are kind of the steps, the troubleshooting steps you'd recommend for people in that spot to try and figure out which weak or which add-on is causing the problem?
First of all, before the tier, you should sort out anything you don't need anymore. But
Okay.
during the tier, there's a profiling in WeakAuras which lets you see which WeakAuras is taking up how many resources. And the important bit is here that you use this while you actually lag. You don't go to a dummy in Orgrimmar and see which WeakAuras is using how much resources. You go to the boss or whatever where you have these issues. It's just as
Okay,
simple
yeah.
as right-clicking the WeakAuras on the minimap, and then you can see their performance, how much CPU time they use, basically.
So at what point do you say fuck this and you buy a new CPU?
I mean, that's never really a good solution.
Just keep
okay.
buying new CPUs until you have enough to.
Surely I
Yeah.
won't lag anymore.
Yeah, surely.
Most of the time, bad WeakAuras are either something that interacts with nameplates, unit frames, because those are always multiplied by a lot, obviously. Or if you have a WeakAura that does something on every frame. Although some WeakAuras, they need to do this. Yeah, not because you see that someone is doing this, that doesn't mean the WeakAura is badly written. Some require this, especially when it's about range checking or just any timed stuff often needs this. But there's a wrong way and the right way of doing it.
All right, this sort of leads into another question we've gotten from Twitter, which says, "Hi, I know what I'm doing if I want to modify WeakAuras." Tuttle's note they've done WeakAuras with the capital A, which you're supposed to do, and you didn't do in the tweet up there. So
There was a lot that was wrong with the tweet. We were gonna ignore that though. It's fine.
I know what I'm doing if I want to modify WeakAuras or WeakAura templates. I can get it to do just about anything I want. What are the cases in which custom code is preferable, and where can I get started learning the code needed? This is a cool question. Yeah. Any advice for somebody who's kind of like, I guess, mastered sort of basic WeakAuras wizardry and wants to take the next steps, maybe?
Yeah, so first of all, generally WeakAuras can do a lot more without custom codes than people realize. They keep adding new features as well, so you sometimes have to dig deep to find it. But yeah, if you need to do a custom code, then if you have no idea what you're doing, then the first step would probably be look for a similar WeakAura from someone else, see what they're doing, try to understand what they're doing, change it up to what you need. Sometimes it's as simple as changing a spell ID, sometimes it's more. And then if you need a new event or a new API call, you can almost always find this actually just by Googling it, literally. Just type in whatever you think it might sound like, if you're looking for like, hey, I need an event when someone joins my group, you just Google group update WoW API, and then you probably find the correct event you need. It's as simple as that. And then if you still have no clue how to go about it, there's always the WeakAuras Discord. There's a lot of people helping there. Just be like as descriptive as possible. Probably link your WeakAura as well so they can look at it. And then
Maybe even search bar for some of the keywords first and see if it's a question that's been asked before.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, but I see that a lot of people won't do that.
Yeah.
Plus, everyone's probably has a slightly different issue.
Yeah. All right, awesome. I guess let's see. I think I'm gonna take this next bit into the after the tip of the week. So we'll do tip of the week next, and then we'll talk about, I guess, just designing a good UI and like kind of the principles and theory behind it, and how you can use add-ons like WeakAuras and other add-ons to accomplish those goals. But first, we get our tip of the week segment. My tip of the week is that coming with next reset, there is going to be a macro conditional available for known and unknown talents. For those of you that use macros, we used to have like talent : 7/3 or whatever, where it's like you could see the third. If you had the third talent on the 7th row, the macro would change based on that. And the new talent trees kind of bricked that as functionality, so it became pretty hard to make a button that was conditionally two different things, and using macros to do that. But they're adding in new logic for this, which is known and no known, which no known is funny way to do this. So you can type that in, and so you can do like /cast known execution sentence, known spell ID, Wake of Ashes, and then Templar's Verdict, right? So this would cast Templar's Verdict if you didn't have either of those talented, and those sorts of things. It means that you can make macros that will switch to the buttons you want based on which talent tree you're using, which is a nice piece of functionality that's available.
I understand why they wrote it as no known, but I cannot believe that they didn't put it as unknown.
Yeah. I mean, it's just to stay consistent, right? Because they do like help, no help, right?
Yeah. It's also just like variable and stuff like that. But it's like, why did they put no known? Like, what is that?
It is funny. All right, Reloe, what is your tip of the week?
Yeah, my tip of the week, also UI related, is use the colored nameplates option from Playder. You can give different NPCs different colors based on, for example, them being a high interrupt priority target or something that you need to CC. It helps you a lot in M+ to quickly see which NPCs you should be targeting, especially in big pulls.
Yeah, you can. I think you can have it so that it's like if they're marked, they get the color of their mark, or you can custom write in, right? Like, oh, the attendants are always purple or something like that. Although you shouldn't need to nameplate color attendants because those things should not be getting pulled. But that kind of thing, yeah, good tech for sure.
Yeah, you should definitely mark all of the mobs that you don't want to pull with red specifically. Like the Skitterflies in Algathar Academy, you can mark those already as red.
They nerfed those twice. Yeah.
Well, they're gonna need a third one probably. I haven't played them this week, but I suspect they're still probably owning.
All right, Tettles, what is your clip of the week this week? Do we need sound for this?
Absolutely. Sound
All right.
actually improves the viewing experience of this clip. It comes from one of our favorite content creators, Kungan, and
Okay.
Kungan proving once again why classic mains are peak intelligence, especially in the World of Warcraft community.
No! I have like a freaking... Okay,
He's doing
I'm
a
so
junkyard.
pissed. I have, like,
Really
an
getting back into the
entertaining
game.
that fucked
He's
me
preparing
over
for Dragonflight.
that
He's
I
been
didn't
gearing
watch.
up his character lately. They are on the HK8 aerial oppression unit. And you may say, oh, this isn't too bad. He only messed up the maze
Like,
3
is that
times in a
enough
row.
to go right, or do they need
You
me?
know
I
what?
don't even
It's
know.
fine. He can just
They
stay
don't
down
need
here.
me, right?
There's nothing really going on. But wait, it gets better.
Oh no. Tragedy. Okay, yeah, brutal. I will say it's not that dissimilar to what's happened to me in some of my keys in that place. That's I can catch you for sure. All right. Iconic clip though. Thanks, Tiddles. All right, let's move on to designing a good UI part 2. And I think the first thing that I want to talk about is how much your UI should be geared to whether you are like raiding versus M+ing and whether you are healing, tanking, or DPSing. So like, because different things will be different priorities between those three. Reload, does your UI like how much work do you have to do to make it work in all of those different places at once, or do you actually have like core parts that change based on whether you're a healer or a tank or whether you're doing keys or a raid?
I personally don't change too much between those things, also not between roles, because I'm just too used to that one style, so it throws me kind of off if I change too much. The main things are like which cooldowns am I tracking, or where my unit frame, my raid frames are located.
Yeah,
But
I think that's kind of
the
the always thing, right? Is like raid frames for healers go more towards the middle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I guess in raid, obviously you do have the raid frames, whereas in M+ you have the party frames. I think one of the big things you can do is figure out what information you want to show on people's raid frames, right? Like, ideally, if there's ever anything you can dispel, that needs to be on there. And if you're somebody who has, basically if there's stuff that you can interact with, you want to make sure that you're going to be able to see those on raid frames. If you're somebody who's like a healer, I think being able to see people's defensives on their raid frames is really valuable too. You can sometimes tell when healers don't have this and they're like bombing heals into, somebody who's immune, and there's people who aren't immune. That kind of thing can be an efficiency loss for sure.
I think that comes in balance with this though in raid, for example. Like if you just put on every defensive on the raid frame, especially if you then also arrest a druid who's tracking like 4 different hots, then it just becomes way too spammy. But tracking active defensive buffs should always be a thing, but tracking them if they are ready might be a different question.
I actually do agree with that. I also think that like more often than not, there are players that don't track specific debuff, like specific encounter debuffs and stuff like that. More often than not, there are a lot of dots that go out on boss fights that'll go on to like 2 or 3 players. And like I mean, Stone Legion Generals I think was like a great example of this. There were a lot of players, I don't know how your guys' guilds did, but just didn't know when they had the dots on them on Stone Legion Generals after they gotten dispelled by the healers, so they didn't know that they should be personaling there, or like when the Goliath was immuning like the amount of healing that you were getting, like they didn't know that they needed to be like popping a heavy personal there as well. And so like I think that being able to track that stuff not only on your own character, but also be able to like quickly analyze that other characters maybe should be like popping a defensive as well, so you can actually mention that is also kind of important.
Yeah, I think if you're like leadership or somebody who's making calls in a raid, that's definitely important. I think the big thing there is like you need to know for yourself if you've got a scary dot on you, right? Like I think Anduin, you had the dot on that fight as well, where whether or not you have that would affect which defensives you pressed when, right? Stone Legion was a great example of this as well, where you just want it to be like really clear if you have an important debuff. That I feel like that shouldn't be on your unit frames. If it's on you, it should be like there should be like a big square on your screen that's like this dot is gonna kill you, press the defensive.
So if you're a healer, you absolutely should be tracking it on players' unit frames. Now, I think DPS and tanks also should be, but they can get away with not, I guess.
It's just like that's not how you want to know that you have it, right? You want to know that you have it because of a different WeakAura that is popping up when you get it, rather than like noticing on your raid frames that you are in danger.
I think it very much depends on the player as well. If you're just someone who doesn't look at the raid frames at all, I mean those people exist. But even then, you could put stuff on them on the raid frames. You just don't look at them. But if you're recording or streaming, you can later go into the VOD and then easier figure out what went wrong during a pull.
Yeah, I think your call of like not putting too much info on there as well, especially if you're like a Resto Druid, like you don't want to track 5 different defensive cooldowns on people's raid frames, because then when you look over there, it's going to be a lot harder for you to like quickly parse what's important, right? So I think even knowing the cooldown of important abilities, you could get away with not doing that too. But just seeing when they're actually active, on people's frames, if you're a healer, vitally important, I think, for good decision making.
If you're a warlock, you need to actually make sure that you know when players have died, so you can actually press your soulstone button.
Actually, like something that like air horns you when somebody dies or something, or plays a sound. I know a lot of people with B-reses have one of those weak auras, so they insta B-res.
I don't know if I would want an audio cue for somebody dying, but it could be good for some players. Like for me, I want audio cues for things that are like mission critical importance for me to be paying attention to, not for. I guess that is really important, but
yeah, I mean, if you catch it, like if you notice it always, then that's fine. It's just like you want to be casting that res the next global in a lot of cases.
That's true.
Yeah, audio cues in general is an interesting one. I know a lot of people kind of use audio cues for different things. Reloe, how do you personally work audio cues into your UI, and do you have any recommendations around that?
Yeah, so there's two different ways to do it. Either you use a voice pack. For example, I think DBM comes with a voice pack by default these days, where it literally calls out the ability. It doesn't just do a random sound. It says ads when ads are spawning or something.
Yeah.
I kind of moved away from that. I'm not a big fan of that anymore, but I know a lot of people are. I use the default sounds that come with WeakAuras and just have a system where I always use the same sound for frontal or for an AoE around a mob, or for if I'm targeted by a specific ability, I use this other specific sound always. So I know by the sound what is happening without even necessarily knowing the ability.
God, he's so much more organized than me.
Yeah, I just use whatever sound the person who made the weak aura chose for that weak aura, unless it really annoys me, and then I change it to something.
I make the weak aura of like this. I have been dying to this way too often. What is the most obnoxious sound? Swords clanging. I'm picking that one.
I like the air horn spam. You have the defile being cast air horn spam weak aura.
That one is awful.
That's a banger. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think that like just in general, like Reloe said, making sure that you have like a system that works for you as an individual player is really good. Like I downloaded his dungeon WeakAuras pack the other day, and I will admit it helped me a lot because I still don't have timers for these dungeons yet. I mean, we haven't really mentioned this, but I think that timers for a lot of stuff is critically important as well, so that way you can like pre-prepare for a lot of things that are going to happen. But like without having the timers, just having like a generic WeakAura pack for me has been able to improve the stuff that I've been dying to, particularly like the burst cast on the tree boss in Algathar Academy, and just a bunch of different stuff like that.
Yeah, I think one of the other core principles about the UI is more important stuff goes towards the middle of the screen, and anything that you're looking at a lot needs to go towards the middle of the screen. Anything that you don't actually need to look at a lot should get out of the middle of the screen. Conversely, right? Like, I think there's a lot of bloat. A lot of people have a lot of stuff near that, in theory is nice to know about, but like, if there's like a proc that increases your damage by a flat 6%, right? Like, whatever that sinful thing, weapon enchant, something like that. Celestial guidance proc, those kinds of things. I think usually when I see people having that stuff near the middle of their screen, when you see those sorts of buffs and debuffs popping up as like big bars, big timers near the middle of the screen, I usually think that's bad. And you kind of want to just take those things and put them out of the way more. Although in some cases it can be good to know about that if you're really good. But for me, at least, my brain is too small to actually factor those into my decision making, and so I put them out at the middle of my screen.
Yeah, I mean the really important decision making WeakAuras always go in the middle of my screen, and then like there are times that I play without things like damage meters and stuff like that, kind of depending on how I'm feeling that day, because like I noticed that some of the auxiliary stuff that's like not really important to like actually killing the boss, I will look at whenever I shouldn't be, whether it be damage meters or whether it be like WeakAuras that are off to the side of my screen or things like that. And it's like can it be helpful? Sometimes, yes, but I think that like more often than not, you really want to make sure that the important stuff is centralized.
Okay, yeah. So I agree. Yeah, you want to be careful about. I think even if you don't like consciously look at stuff as well, if there's just extra information that you're never using, either putting that far away so that you can look at it on VODs later, or just removing it from your UI, is always a good thing to consider. Let's see, party CDs. Any of your friends' ability CDs that you might need to know about, especially in M+. There's a lot of these that are important, like your group's offensive CDs, your Shroud cooldown, but also people's defensive CDs, external CDs, those sorts of things. Anything that you ever like ask somebody, when's your next Tyrant or something like that, like start tracking Tyrant instead so that you could just look at that and not need to ask.
So wait, Reloe, you don't have a more like for me? I know that whenever I'm doing 5-mans, I have like a way more extensive list of things that I'm tracking on a per player basis.
Yeah, I don't really at the moment. I mean,
Okay.
I've never done super high keys, so I didn't feel the need to do it. I should probably add it at some point, just tracking offensives and mainly offensives actually, because I don't really care too much about defensives as a tank. But yeah.
Like a interrupt tracker, I think is also something
Yeah,
that's
I mean
like...
that one I have, but
Yeah.
That's a near mandatory one if you're trying to do any dungeon.
That's the kind of thing where, yeah, like you don't necessarily need your whole UI to be different between raids and M+, right? It's just like some WeakAuras that just turn on in 5-player content or turn on in raid content. Will do that very well for you. Let's see. Any other... I guess the nameplates we've already talked about, but there's a lot of important stuff for tracking on nameplates is the best way to do that. How do you feel about, I guess, threat indications? How do you know your threat situation as a tank, Reloe, and how much does your UI help you on that?
I changed the nameplate color of that, which can be an issue if you use the nameplate coloring from Plater too much. Because if everything just has a different color, and then it's hard to notice that one of them changed their color and you lost threat. So I try to keep that low. But yeah, generally I just have the same. I think I have red. Yeah, red if I don't have threat as a tank, or if I pull threat as a DPS. And otherwise it's blue. That's easy to distinguish then.
Dude, what's the deal with threat this expansion? Is threat okay right now?
No, it's not okay.
How do they keep doing this? How have we had like 6 consecutive buffs to threat? Like, I'm pretty sure if you took the last 8 patches, I think that we have more than half of them involving a threat buff in some way, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's true.
How does this keep happening, man? They gotta fix tank threat.
I feel like the issue is tanks they can do higher damage at the moment, but at least for Monk, it relies a lot on CDs, so you don't have that damage on every pull, and then you have a Demon Hunter just fell rushing into the pack instantly where you don't have any CDs, and yeah.
Well, they deserve to die there.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. How about like effective health? Stagger. How much do you? I know you use action bars for most of your stuff, but how many of those sorts of like class features do you end up either making, or I guess making in your case WeakAuras for?
I don't really track how high my stagger is, and then I track it with a number, so not a bar or something. And I mean that's about it for like the class stuff.
Yeah, pretty minimalist take. I guess I can switch to the middle of the jailer kill here. It's just like, yeah, I mean not too much, right? It's like, okay, weapons of order.
I mean, that's a bit outdated now, but yeah, the idea is the same, I guess.
You know what's funny? I actually track Brewmaster Monk stagger whenever I'm in a 5-man with them.
Really?
The number, not the well, it also has
Not the color?
too, but yeah, but I track like the number because, well, sometimes you want to drop trees for them, but I can't really tell when they're actually in danger because that spec, well, sometimes is like it looks like it's unkillable and sometimes it just dies, and I'm like, well, I couldn't tell that you were dead, and he goes, well, I had 1 million damage that I was staggering. And I go, what does this mean?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to track that actually. Yeah.
Because like for prop warriors or like blood DKs and stuff like that, you can like look at their CDs and you're like, oh, okay, he's not gonna have shield block up, or oh, okay, he's not gonna have like shield the righteous up in a second. I'm gonna press my button here, or like Dancing Room
Yeah.
weapons falling, and he's like, okay, I know that I'm pressing my button here. Whereas for Monk, it's like not that clear for me more often than not. So that's why I make sure that I have like a staggered number tracker.
For DK, I feel like for depending on which tank you're playing with, I think there is definitely good info if you're trying to do something like drop trees or heal somebody, or you have externals, right? There's a lot of good, clever weak auras you can find that will help you know how healthy they are, like Death Strike size and runic power and that kind of stuff for your DK. That just lets you know how much resources they have to save themselves. Yeah, I mean, I think that's cool info to show, especially in a 5-player content. But
yeah,
it's like if you're not actually using it, it might bloat your
I
frames.
sure as hell don't need that in raid. That is not a raid weak aura ever. Like I could not care less how much damage our Brewmaster Monk on tanking the boss is taking.
How about incoming heals? I know there's either add-ons or raid frames that will do this, that will like show how much incoming healing somebody's about to receive. Do either of you have a take on whether this is good or bad to have on and look at?
I have it for myself and for my entire raid. I just see it as an overlay on the raid frames and my own unit frame. And yeah, I think it's on the raid frames you only really need it as a healer. Yeah, or like maybe in dungeon that's fine as well. But like as a tank in raid, that's not important for me. But for myself, definitely need to know if people are currently casting on me or not.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to make sure you have turned on as well. Pretty free thing to have that can give you some good info.
I actually don't have it turned on, but yeah, I don't think I think it's good. Like, and I think if you could utilize it well, I think it makes sense. For me, it's not something that like I'm really looking at ever, and so I would never utilize it. But at the same point, I do see how it would be useful if I was able to get some use out of it.
Yeah, I will say
I think it becomes very intuitive. Like you don't have to actively look at it. It's just when you look at your health bar and you see there's an overlay covering 40% of your HP, you know that heal is coming.
Well, I know that if I'm at 10% HP, either I'm getting lay on hands or I'm regrowthing myself, and there's no in between here.
I guess fair enough. I don't know.
I agree though. Like it definitely is. It's probably something that should change. now that you say it like that, it's almost certainly something that I should change, because it at least only on myself. Even like if I'm looking at other people, it's like whatever. I'm not fucking healing somebody in a raid, or like I know what's happening in a 5-man more often than not to be fine. But like it's hard to be able to tell if I'm gonna get healed by 1 out of the 5 healers or not at all, and like should I be healing myself at that point?
All right. Let's see. Any final UI thoughts? Anything we didn't get to that either of you were hoping to talk about UIs or weak auras or add-ons? Anything at all?
I think that healers definitely have the hardest job with like making sure that, I think that making a UI that's good for yourself, not even just if you're a healer, but in general, like making a UI that like works well with what you're doing is probably the most important aspect of it. WoW at its core does not have a lot of intuitive systems to make like your decision making sucks if you're only playing with just like default base UI and you don't know exactly what's happening. And there are a lot of add-ons, weak auras, customization options that can make your information a bit more available. And so just finding what works for you and finding where you're lacking in your own UI, that's probably what I would say. Like that's the biggest piece of advice that I have for players.
I think one important thing is you need to be recording your gameplay. Like you can only remember so much during actually doing a dungeon that I want to move this, and you need to record it and then be able to look at it later so you actually remember what you wanted to change.
Yeah, for me, I think the mindset of like, oh, I just died to this. Is there a weak aura solution, or do I need to get good? And more often than not, there are ways that I can do a little bit of weak auras instead of getting good. And I think those are valuable things to do whenever you're doing group content and there's a team that's relying on you. So I think having a good idea for like what sorts of information display would make it so that this would be easier for me whenever you struggle with a mechanic is really good.
I have a very interesting topic. Okay, not exactly related to UI. Pull this tweet up.
Right.
I want to hear what you guys think about this tweet. Not exactly like the top of the tweet, but just like what was said towards the middle and the bottom of the chain. I think it
Okay.
was a very interesting topic whenever I read it on Twitter, a couple weeks back.
Okay, so this is based on League of Legends adding more info to the jungle timers and stuff, and
Yes.
WoW went this direction through the evolution of add-ons and weak auras. Again, weak auras not capitalized, and the space between the weak and the auras, so unfortunate there. Becoming so crazy, and it actually made the game at the highest level less skilled IMO because everyone is armed with perfect information. Those who didn't need add-ons for it lose their edge, and the game slows.
Obviously, as a player, I would tell you, get as much information as possible. Get the information that you need. To
Right.
optimize your own play, you absolutely should be getting as much information as possible. Now, there's the philosophical question of, was this good for the game? Which is a really interesting one, because it does allow you to have more perfect information, but was the game too difficult without it? Or what do you guys think, just generally?
First of all, I think you need to say that nothing has really changed in the last 18 years. You could have done the same stuff
Well,
in Classic.
You
They
could have actually
nerfed-
done more.
Yeah, they nerfed
Yeah.
most of the stuff that we could have done. It's just people kind of only started figuring out over time all the different things you could. Do you remember in ICC the AVR Azeroth virtual reality or whatever that would 3D draw? This may have been before your time titles, but it would basically do 3D overlays onto the game of where you needed to move and stuff, and it was really OP. It was basically 3D weak auras. Yeah. I don't know.
I'm not sure if it is the fact that WeakAuras and boss mods and whatever existed, this made the game harder over time, or
Yeah.
it's the other way around, that the game got harder over time and then people reacted with solutions through add-ons.
I do think it's really interesting because I actually do kind of agree that in some aspects the skill expression on an individual player level gets reduced by just the sheer amount of information that all players have access to now. Whereas before there was a lot of intuitiveness and it's just playing the game a lot. There was some level of you kind of fall into a rhythm or a flow, but now you have perfect information with timers, and you always know what buffs and debuffs are on you. And I mean, obviously this is related more towards PvP than anything, and DR trackers and stuff like that is, I think, kind of what's being referenced here. It's really an interesting thing where it's oh, should the game have done this or not?
I think PvE has this as well. That when you think about jailer bombs, right? The way the jailer bomb mechanic is done with weak auras is it puts a graphical display of the pizza slice up, and then highlights the one that you're supposed to go to, and it says your front middle or whatever, or I guess back middle, and it assigns the whole raid to one based off of we give it a list of who's priority for the front and who's priority for the right, and you go to that spot and then you jump in, right? If you imagine how that mechanic would be done without weak auras, right, involving
not
intuition and player decision making. I don't know. I feel like Anduin Blasphemy is kind of another example of this as well, where there were Echo solved this with a weak aura, right, where it's just everybody spread to a specific location, and then it turbo brain IQ told them who to link up with and showed you where to go for them. But my guild just kind of spread to the same rough spots each time, and then used a couple of conventions to do it intuitively instead whenever this mechanic came out, and it was actually really fun to do it that way. And I feel like it wouldn't have been very fun to do the weak aura execution of that mechanic by contrast. So I don't know. I do sort of empathize with the position that there are mechanics that are fun to execute, but you can weak auras the fun out of them, or the weak auras, even potentially the weak auras existing, mean that the mechanics get so complicated that then they're not reasonable to do without the weak auras. But I don't know. It's an interesting topic for any individual player. Of course, the answer is always give yourself the most advantage you can, right?
Yes.
Do not uninstall your weak auras on principle. You should, don't hate the player, right? Hate the game. But I do think there is some reasonableness behind the sentiment here.
I think the jailer one could have been easily prevented in a non-weak aura situation there. I think they would just make it so that it only applies 3 or 4, and then one of them goes on a melee, one on a ranged, one on a healer, and one maybe the off tank or something, if that works out with timers.
Okay.
Right, and then you don't need a weak aura to assign it. You just always say, hey, healer goes there and tank goes there.
I I mean, we haven't talked about this for a while, but I still have the sentiment of I think assignment WeakAuras are bad for the game as a whole. Like, I think that designing mechanics that require WeakAuras to assign and parse players and tell them where to go off of a list is really, really not great. Because it means the mechanics, I think, at their core are a little bit too complex.
Yeah, it's a tricky one for sure. All right, we have a couple of Q&A questions to get to, but first, get to thank the supporters over on the Patreon. They are Paul, Riley, maybe I'll fly away from WoW and Dragonflight and finally be fully free, but I doubt it, for I always come back. Never Nude, Ja, Drownus' Dino Pillow, Chromed, Trekkie, Chewy, Texan Resident, enjoys living like a streamer, knowing every dungeon's fancy organized routes in TFP, aka Trell asked for it. Unfortunately, Trell AFK this week, so gonna miss his fun acronym. ZivXX, Salty Senny, Necris, Sinmora, Tankdill, Nevuk, Eevee Survival Main, No Trick, I Forgot I Was Sub Tier, Dymat, Lufer, Rework Mistweaver. Congrats to Kalamazi for becoming the new Affliction class writer. Stay safe in the hurricane. Yeah, congrats, Kalamazi. New Wowhead Affliction writer, so love to see that.
Dude,
Nix.
I bought a graphics card off him, unironically.
How did that happen?
I needed a new one. And
So you just had an
had
extra
one.
graphics card? Okay.
I mean, he always does.
Delete Gaming, Gallic, Brusif, Dratner Starts Abyss. Now you are here at Titanforge Podcast episode 153. Now you are here at Titanforge Podcast episode 154. Now you are gone. M Sanity, Xena. Rogue is now good enough for Prog, but still bad enough to be sat for SLG. Bless up. Red Color, youtube.com/workbringer. Alphabet Soup, Druid Friends of Evolved Gaming. Number one Simski for Trelsky. Lurka wants to remind the world that it's not my fault. Milk.
Reloe, I have a question. How is your Australian accent?
Good. I have a German accent. That's the only one I have. I don't think I can do that.
It's okay. I couldn't either. It took many weeks of practice to get it to be passable. Sife, Pone, Windwalker Bugs deal with nerfs by rolling with the punches. Due to Sims with 4-piece, Skelly will be going back to Elemental from Enhance. PI for sale, I have Crafting to level. The Marsh Hare. Veilstider, Svar. Why do hardcore raiders smell? Because they never wipe. Big Head Small Brain and Narnar TV is back and ready to press Starfall. And Agitar. Thanks all for the support. Our first Q&A question comes from Kyrasis in Discord, who says, what do you think of the concept of players purposefully using an unleveled and swappable profession to help meet Court of Stars buff requirements when playing with different groups? I hate it very much. I do not like the Court of Stars buff things. The good news is that it's only Court of Stars and Azure Vault that have profession stuff in Dragonflight Season 1, I think. All the other profession dungeons, I think, are in Dragonflight Season 2.
Was Azure Vault have something still?
I think it has Inscription/Evoker.
There was an Inscription Evoker polymorph thing. Is that still in the game?
I believe so, although I'm not super confident. That was what Squishy told me when I DM'd him a couple days ago.
Okay, well then he's probably he knows more than me.
Yeah. I hate the idea though of like if pushing M+ and have to swap my professions to make my Court of Stars group good, I'm gonna be salty about that. Because I want to do professions on my main, but I'll probably end up just doing it on my alts as instead because of this. All right, next question comes from Tiger in Discord, who says, with the new crafting system, as well as small power gains in certain professions, and crafting gear being potential power boosts, bolstering the arms of the World First race, bolstering the arms of Race to World First to top 100, what plans do your guilds have to min-max the new systems? What plans do you have personally? And what do you predict World First guilds will do to handle this change? I foresee very high gold debts, even with the reduction of BOE impacts. So I will admit I'm not super up on exactly how the professions work. My understanding is there's like time gating behind the high level profession gear, so you can't get like full mythic week 1 gear out of professions, which I think will keep the economic impact on top guilds from being too high. But I don't know enough to be super confident about this. I don't know if either of you guys have been involved in planning for the professions stuff for your guilds.
You can craft 1 high item level gear per week.
Okay.
So like by the time the raid comes out, that would be 3 items.
Okay. That's a lot.
We personally, we don't really plan anything within the guild. We aren't like, hey, this person does specializes in this specific thing. Because at the end of the day, you can just get everything through trade chat. You can't. You could do it through the crafting orders, but there's still this issue with quality. You can't specify which quality you want in the public crafting orders, so you still need to find someone through trade. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. My guild, we're potentially gonna try and have one high level of each profession, maybe if there's enough people that are actually gonna try and like do the recipe grinding. But I don't know. The thing is, like, okay, you could do that for the first 2 weeks, but then when the
Yeah.
third week rolls around, like, you don't want people in your guilds to be spending their time on that, right? That you want them to be doing keys and stuff. So
Yeah, you'd rather them do M+.
Yeah.
I mean, all of our guilds, like, we raid, like, it's so weird because raiding used to be like, okay, I only show up to raid and do the bosses, and that's my level of progression. And now everything related to prog raiding is also, oh, I have to grind this profession. Oh, I have to do M+ any given moment that I have free time, and all this other stuff that's extracurricular outside of raid. It's been completely unrelated to the question, but it's super interesting to see how like it's evolved over time.
I think for raiders, there's more important stuff to do in the first 2 weeks than grinding professions.
I agree
You
with
can
that.
grind Primal Chaos. You can get better gear to start off in the raid week. Level more alts.
yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting. For the world first guilds, I don't feel like this will be that different. Like, I mean, Castle Nathria with 4 BOEs per armor type was like such a huge gold investment, right? I don't know. I feel like this will be. I don't think we're going to see gold debts bigger than we did in Shadowlands necessarily, but I could be wrong about that.
You know, I blame Nyalotha.
Yeah, Nyalotha gold with the corruption. Man, if we got Nyalotha again, gold debts would be in the billions. Yeah.
Dude. If we had Nyalotha again, it would be over.
Yeah. All right, next question comes from Twitter from Wade, who says, "What's the most common mistake that people make when making their own weak aura, and how can they avoid it?" I don't know how much new player or new weak auras or stuff you've seen Reload, but do you have any intuition for what this might be?
But if you're super new, the mistake is not using the templates. There's the template feature. Like, it doesn't teach you necessarily how the weak auras work themselves, but it gets you what you need really fast. And yeah, otherwise it's if you're a bit more advanced, it would be using custom code when you don't need it, because as I said previously, there's so much stuff you can do by default now. A lot of people just don't know it, or copy code from like a Legion weak aura that's that you can do without code for 3 years now.
That would never happen. Nobody would ever do such a thing.
It happens all the time.
That would never happen.
Our next question comes from Prey, who says, "Please ask about his geography book." What does
Oh,
this
no.
mean? What's your geography
No,
book, Relo?
no, we don't talk about this.
He sounds like a world traveler. I mean,
No,
Okay.
no, I'll pass.
okay.
All right, well, there's some Relo lore that I don't know that.
I don't know it either.
Next question comes from Twitch chat from Dukes, who says, "Do you think the gear you can craft will be relevant to your main tune, or will you always outgear what you can craft via M+? I think you could some of that crafted gear, right? That 1 per week is better than M+ gear, right?
Yes, and not only that, I'm actually not sure what exact item level you get, but there's a thing you get from, I think, only World Quests. Might be like a weekly or bi-weekly World Quest where you can upgrade the blue crafted gear, and I think that's slightly higher than M0 if you get it on max quality.
Okay.
Okay, so in the first 2 weeks, that's worth doing for getting better than the M0 gear. Yeah.
I mean, in general, though, like the vault is going to outperform crafted gear, but crafted gear is definitely really good early.
Yeah, it feels like crafted gear is going to be you're gonna have several pieces of crafted gear on for the first and like for December and January on your character,
Yeah.
probably. Yeah. All right. That is it for our questions, and that's going to be it for our show as well. Relo, besides your YouTube channel that we already displayed earlier, is there anywhere else people can find your content?
Twitter, Twitch, I guess Vago to find my WeakAuras.
Yeah.
It doesn't have a follow button, but yeah.
Yeah, you find any of his WeakAuras, then click on the reload button, and you can go through all of them. Big shout out to WeakAuras devs and add-on devs all around as well. Anybody that makes good use of these, always worth considering. Turning turning off your ad blocker, which I realize I've now forgotten to do for Wago. So let me do that for that site.
Fucked up.
Yeah, but also there's Patreons available for most of these sites and services as well. Ways you could support add-on devs that way. So here I've got my ad blocker off on this site now as well. So learn about some good products on Wago, all that kind of stuff. Good ways to kind of support the add-on dev community. So and the WeakAuras devs.
I've started subscribing to more and more people's Patreons and stuff like that lately because I've realized that it's like, okay, this is a lot of fucking work, and I've been getting a lot of value out of this kind of stuff.
I like to throw my Twitch Prime around in stealth mode, so I don't click the button to announce it, but to various add-on devs every month whenever I can. The ones that have Twitches.
Use it when they're offline and stuff. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm a big time lurker in any stream except for like Tettles's. I never type. I just lurk. I hate anything that puts my name on the Twitch chat. Anyways, that's gonna be it for us this week. Thanks so much for joining us, Reloe. Good luck next tier, and I really appreciate your expertise. We'll see everybody next week. Later, gamers.
Bye.